Well, hello, and how are you today as you join our sermon time in Maisons-Laffitte? It's genuine summertime here now. School is done, and here at Holy Trinity, we're about to move to our Sunday schedule of only one service on a Sunday. That's at 10:30. Now, this slower pace also means we have more time for things that really matter, like getting together and having a chat. So, if you would be interested in getting together with me or Charlotte over the summer, over tea in the garden or over Zoom, please do get in touch with us. Meanwhile, let's turn our thoughts to today's Bible passage, which is found in 2 Samuel chapter 6. If you've got the time, why not settle down and read the whole chapter, even going back to chapter 5 before listening further? We don't seem to have spent much time recently focusing on the Old Testament readings, but they do provide a rich history for us when we know how to hear them. I wonder if we can picture the scenes described in chapter 6 and the extent to which these celebrations had consumed the young nation. It was nothing like getting in a new government in our modern political world, where we're, probably mostly jaded and have low expectations regardless of who's won or lost. This was completely different. Have you read on the BBC this week about the most extravagant wedding celebrations that have been taking place in India over the past months for a son of the country's wealthiest family? Or maybe think of the Queen's Jubilee or the coronation, when the whole nation gets put on pause and everyone gets a special holiday. And there are events in every town, sometimes on every street to celebrate. Well, here in chapter 6, this is for something completely new. They're looking forward. And the elation we read about is completely unadulterated, untinged by cynicism. It's really an extended and all-consuming set of events across the nation, and there is a boundless giving over of oneself to joy. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Well, the Ark of the Covenant has just and is just arriving in Jerusalem. It's a sign of God's presence with the nation. It's the repository of the Ten Commandments, and it's been brought into the newly established city of David, Jerusalem. And David, along with the whole nation, they're having the most amazing party. I mean, that is everybody. Were you struck in the reading, like I was, by the fact that it isn't just David celebrating? There's this feeling of unity, this repetition of the word all. There are 30,000 men with him. And then there's that amazing, generous handing out of bread and date and raisin loaves to every individual, both men and women. Let's not think about the weeks of preparation that must have taken. The great thing is, nobody seems to be left out. And the exuberance and resulting open-hearted, open-handed spirit is everywhere. Kind of, ça fait envie. That would be really nice, wouldn't it? This fullness of giving over to joy is perhaps most visible in David's completely unreserved, and did you see, undignified leaping and dancing in celebration around the ark. He's taken off all the heavy signs of prestige and status, and he's just in his linen ephod, throwing his whole body and being into worship. Can you imagine doing this? The freedom, casting off every social constraint, every sense of anyone's eyes but God's eyes, and your eyes seeing no eyes but God's. Now, since you're listening at home, maybe you have the freedom to test out what this might have felt like if you've never done so. I mean, what have you got to lose? Imagine not holding back in giving yourself to praising God. Chapter 6 is full of joyous worship music. So maybe you'd like to put some on and then stand up and Let your body express the worship your heart feels. Maybe that means swaying back and forth. Maybe that means raising your arms or jumping or twirling. If you do so, please be careful. Or maybe you find yourself prostrate on the ground before our pure and 3 times holy God and Creator. Don't be embarrassed. We are made to worship something, someone. This is what Christian observers of social trends say was missed by the Richard Dawkins New Atheist crowd when they tried to act as if God wasn't there. And we see all kinds of secular manifestations of the need for this, the way people throw themselves in a frenzy into listening to concerts and world tournaments, and even sometimes in response to the latest social media trend. There is an irrepressible need that we have to express our excitement over something wonderful. And yet, sometimes when we are in front of that wonderful thing, wonderful person, God, we don't allow ourselves to. Maybe because we sense that there's someone watching, judging, hanging back. Maybe somebody who even resents or despises the fact that we're participating and enthusiastic about God's work. In this text, you notice that person is David's wife. The one person who ought to have been most fully celebrating with her husband. Instead, she is aloof and disdainful. And why is she back watching from a window? Why didn't she go out alongside him, share her spouse's joy? And yes, I fully understand the potential social constraints of the time on women, but the text implies that other women were present, so why wasn't she? So I start to speculate. Had she thought that his achievements might include a prestigious and dignified place for herself? I mean, surely she's not resentful of all the attention on him as he worships God, or that God has chosen him as a leader. Whatever the reason, she's clearly embarrassed to be associated with him as he's making a spectacle of himself in such an unrestrained, exuberant public display of emotion. But when they have a conversation about this, and she says those awful dripping words to him, he calls her attention back to the fact that what he's doing hasn't originated from human choices, but he's been chosen by God. He is the leader of this nation because God came and found him. God had seen David's heart when he was only a shepherd under the sky. Smelly goats. I mean, very sweet, I'm sure. And it's that shepherd's heart. That's the heart that's dancing before God on a bigger stage than he or his family could have ever imagined. David's abandonment of himself to God is our takeaway for today. I mean, I know it could be dancing. Personally, I love dancing, although I almost never do it. But actually, the takeaway is about imitating David's heart. David is a type of Christ here. That means prefiguring an example of Jesus. And much of David's life is a parallel picture of David, of Jesus. Not all of it, I know. Not the bits where he initiates adultery and murder because he's gotten lazy and covetous. Not that bit. But here, David is a type of Christ in his demonstrating a full pouring out of himself before God, whereas his wife is a type of the world, a picture of the world, which ultimately means Satan, scorning, mocking, despising those who give themselves over to God with their whole beings. David is our focus. He's prefiguring how Christ would give himself completely away and become the most despised figure by dying on a cross in shame in full view of all. As Isaiah 53 says, he was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one whom people hide their faces from. he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. But it is this Jesus who the Father now has raised up in glory to be honored at his right hand. It is this Jesus who we, like the ordinary slaves of this world, freed by Jesus, kind of like those slave girls that David refers to, we turn to, we worship, and we honor this Jesus who made himself nothing and who gave himself, poured himself out for us. So our invitation this week is to examine our own hearts and ponder, does something hold us back in how we worship God? Is there something in our lives which hasn't been laid out bare for him? And maybe, what do we wish our worship of God felt like? How do we wish our lives were lived for him? Well, may the Lord guide us into new insights and refresh us in this gentler, slower season in the west of Paris. Amen. Hope you have a great week.